Welcome to The Tech Life with Rich Conte, bringing you stories from the front lines of the tech industry and the insider's perspective on starting, growing, or thriving in a technology venture.
Welcome to another episode of Silicon Harbor Radio, brought to you by the Tech Life podcast and Silicon Harbor Magazine. I'm your host, Rich Conte. Each episode, we take you inside Charleston's rapidly growing tech and startup community and give a voice to the local entrepreneurs and other contributors driving that growth. One of the common themes that crops up whenever we talk with entrepreneurs on the show about the challenges they're facing in trying to scale a startup is how to consistently generate revenue to help fuel their growth and show value to investors. In early stage companies, there's such a focus on learning about your market and finding product market fit that revenue generation strategies are often ad hoc or exploratory exercises. At some point in their growth, though, it becomes essential for companies to create a sustainable revenue model and operationalize their marketing and revenue generation efforts. Solving that problem often involves staffing up a sales force and applying some consistent sales framework or methodology. In this episode, we'll learn about an agency that's built a successful business by developing expertise with a particular methodology and building off of it by applying design thinking principles to how they apply it for their customers. Our guest on this episode of Silicon Harbor Radio, brought to you by the Tech Life podcast and Silicon Harbor Magazine, is Chad Sanderson. Chad is managing partner for Value Prime Solutions. Welcome to the show, Chad.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
Chad, can you start by sharing with listeners a little about Value Prime Solutions, what your mission is, the services you provide, and who your customers are?
Sure, yeah. So Value Prime Solutions is a marketing and sales enablement organization. So we work with basically companies of any size, clients from Adobe on down to startups, focused on really implementing the value selling framework, which is a sales methodology and approach designed to enable people to talk to customers and buyers more about value than price. Really helps them understand how to understand the buyer's perspective, right? Value is defined by the buyer, not by sales reps or marketing people that want to run in and talk features and functions. And so we work with clients to enable their sales and marketing organizations by implementing the value selling framework, as well as what we call the Vortex prospecting framework, which is really about creating more qualified leads at the top of the funnel.
Now, how did the idea for the framework and the decision to pursue it as a venture originate?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the value selling has actually been around for over 20 years. The value selling framework was developed, came out of Xerox. A gentleman by the name of Lloyd Sappington actually developed the framework over 20 years ago. And if I remember correctly, Sappington and actually Brian Bosworth worked together at Xerox. Brian Bosworth created solution selling. And so they spun out, obviously created their own companies. Bosworth went off and did solution selling. Lloyd went off and started value selling. And about, I think it was 7, maybe 8 years ago, a woman by the name of Julie Thomas bought the value selling company. She came out of Gartner. She was an executive at Gartner, and she really kind of invested in expanding the associates and the framework. And so I actually was introduced to it 14, maybe 15 years ago. When I moved from marketing, I joined the dark side. I guess it depends what side of the coin you're on in terms of what you think is the dark side. But I started my career in marketing. And after running global marketing teams, decided I wanted to move into sales. And when I moved into sales, I was actually the VP who gave me that shot said, hey, I'm happy to do that, but you need to use the sales framework that I train you in. And so he brought in a gentleman by the name of Rick Conte, who trained me 14, 15 years ago. It was the key to my success. It changed the way I looked at sales. It changed the way I looked at marketing, actually. And as a result of that, as my career went on and I built other sales and marketing teams for other organizations, I always brought Rick Conte back in. Well, end of last year, Rick approached me and said, hey, look, you're very passionate about the value selling framework. You know, like most sales guys, you went out and got trained in everything else, but you keep coming back to value selling. You really should join the business. And so I became business partners with Rick Conte and his other partner, George, and then David Schatz is on the team as well. And we kind of operate under the Value Prime Solutions brand, but we are using the value selling associates IP, the frameworks, the tools, the sales plugins, technology, things like that. And it's really kind of a labor of love. It sounds kind of odd when you talk about sales, but I spent so many years working internally in organizations to get other areas of a company to understand sales, understand the personal side of sales, the human connection side of it. And it just got to be a little tiresome. And so now I get to actually work with the salespeople that are bought in. They've already, their executives have already done the internal selling that they have to do. We can just focus on making them better at their jobs. And that's kind of been, a very nice change for us.
What was the experience of bringing that Value Prime Solutions brand to market like? Did you learn anything early on, and has that shaped kind of the form the offering's taken?
That's a really good question. So interestingly enough, because I started my career in marketing, I have a very weird hybrid view. And I have, like most salespeople, I have a bit of a, let's say, type A personality. So when we developed the Value Prime brand, the goal was not to change anything about the value selling framework. Value selling framework is bulletproof in my experience. But what we wanted to do was come up with a brand and an approach to market that allowed us to kind of broaden the ways that we enabled sales and marketing organizations. And so value selling framework and vortex prospecting, they're the core of what we do. They are the vast majority of what we do. But we've also had the opportunity to develop some other job aids and reinforcement tools that will help our customers. We developed it, we did the typical thing when you go to market. We went out, we looked at all of the sales enablement companies out there, and everything, maybe this is more a trend in web design, but everything was light and bright and it was all whites and grays and blues. And so we decided when we were developing the brand, we were working with a brand agency. I said, look, I want the complete opposite. I want something that's going to stand out a little bit. So we went a little bit heavier and darker on the brand. We made sure that our messaging resonated in a way that was consistent and true with the value selling framework. Because the power of the value selling framework is that it helps you connect to another person's understanding and perspective of value. And so all of our content that we develop, the podcast we put together, all of those things are around trying to reinforce that. It was a interesting process. This is probably the second company I've taken to market personally, and things have changed a lot in 12 years. So it was a lot more making sure we had the right digital presence, social presence, that the brand had multifacets. So when you hit the website, there's this is the business side of it, but we use, kind of Facebook as a way to give you a glimpse into kind of our culture and us actually executing. Twitter's a little bit more of, sharing information. We engage more on LinkedIn. We work with our clients to understand kind of the digital evolution that sales and marketing are currently undergoing. And that had to show up as we took the company to market. So it was a bit of a journey. We did it really fast. I mean, we went from 0 to full website with membership areas and all of that stuff in 97 days. Wow. It was a march for sure, but it seems to have worked. The feedback's been good. And I get a lot of jokes when I'm not selling or working with marketing teams. I ride motorcycles. I'm a Harley guy. And so all of my friends are like, oh yeah, great. So you came up with a brand that uses very similar colors. And I'm like, it wasn't me. It was the design agency.
Now, you touched on this, but what are the things that differentiates the value selling framework from other sales enablement methodologies?
Let's just be completely honest. The vast majority of sales methodologies out there, they all have a great deal of similarities, right? They may use different words. They may talk about, you got to find an internal champion, or you've got to understand who the economic buyer is. Some of them use, different types of tools. But when somebody says, what makes value selling different? For me, it is basically three things. It is simple. It is very, very simple. It's not rocket science. It's very simple, and it doesn't get in the way of a salesperson doing their job. A lot of the sales methodologies and tools out there, and we're seeing this really bad with digital technologies that are coming out, have a tendency to get in the way and slow down the sales process or salespeople. So the first one for me is simplicity. The second one is it enables me and people that use it to not talk features, benefits, and functions. It is a process and methodology that is totally focused on the buyer. It's not focused on me as a rep, or how do I get to a demo faster, or how do I get you my T's and C's faster. It is really focused on how do I, whether it be a small company or a large company, how do I identify who the stakeholders are, and how do I understand what their perception, because each one will be different, their perception of value is, and how do I, as an individual, connect to that and collaborate with them on a solution. So second one would be perspective, right? I think it has a different perspective on how sales should happen. And I think that becomes even more important today when buyers want to be collaborated with. They don't want to be sold to. The speed of sales is changing, and it becomes more difficult for sales reps to not fall back into that safety of features and benefits. This is my features and benefits, right? So perspective would be number two. And I'd say the third one is, quite honestly, it's the only solution, having been through a lot of them, it's the only solution that allows us to sell to multifaceted teams of decision makers, right? So not everybody wants to be challenged, right? The challenger sale is the big one right now. But not everybody wants to be challenged. It works if you're selling to a personality who likes that, but sometimes it can cause problems. So it is a framework that is more flexible in terms of allowing me to engage in the right way with the right people in a way that is tuned to them. Again, not me. And that shift from focusing on the salesperson and making them look at the way they're doing things or what the next step is in their process, to shifting them to look at from the buyer's perspective is where the power comes in, is what makes it so effective.
We'll return to our conversation with Chad in a moment, but first I want to share a little about another podcast that I've recently started listening to. It's called Malicious Life. If you enjoyed our episode featuring Charleston-based cybersecurity technology company Fish Labs and their founder John LaCour, you need to check out Malicious Life. Malicious Life tells the story of the pioneers and criminals that shaped the earliest days of the cybersecurity industry. You get the insider's perspective on the entire history of cybersecurity and malware, from the days of the very first virus all the way up to the major ransomware attacks of 2017. The show is fascinating, and more than that, it's topical. Just recently, we've seen the hacks of HBO and even more frightening consumer credit agency Equifax. We're seeing ransomware attacks target public services, corporations, and governments with ever-increasing frequency. And it's important and entertaining to learn about the history of malicious attacks from the 70s and 80s up to today. Host Ran Levy talks with both former hackers and security experts, investigating and telling their story over the course of the first season's 6 episodes. The episodes feature guests like Graham Cluley, an award-winning security blogger, researcher, and public speaker who has worked with law enforcement agencies on investigations into hacking groups and regularly appears on TV and radio explaining computer security threats. Cluley is featured in episode 2 titled The Dark Avenger. Add Malicious Life to your podcast rotation. Check out the first episode and you'll be hooked. It's like Tech Life meets Serial. Now, you mentioned your background in marketing, but you also have a background in user experience and enabling human connections through technology. How's that experience translated to your work at Value Prime Solutions?
So it's interesting. I spent the last 10 years working in the digital agency space. So we would work with companies of all sizes, from the Verizons and eBays on down to small startups, and really talk about and help them understand how to design a digital experience that merged both the physical and digital. Because it's not just about the experience you're having on your phone. Is that experience on your phone or your computer or a touch screen in a lobby? How is that amplifying where you are physically? Is it designed the right way? Is it designed for 2-finger usage, 3-finger usage, things of those nature? Like, there was a lot of thinking that had to go into that, and to guide that thinking, just like the value selling framework drives you to think about the other person, you really have to focus on how somebody is going to use it, who that person is, what the value is they want out of it, right? So it was very nicely aligned with kind of my exposure to value selling. And as we spent more time with companies talking about things like, all right, you need to think about, especially with IoT now, you need to think about when somebody's walking through a space, what information do they need at what time and in what way in order to make that experience as frictionless as possible. And so we spent a lot of time doing strategy sessions and then designing and developing these multi-platform digital experiences that were 100% designed to increase the ease of the user's experience in life. It translates very, very very well into the value selling, because at the same time, value selling is helping us do that same thing with sales, with B2B sales. We want to make that experience as frictionless as possible. I think, especially as the millennials come up, those that are so used to technology, I'm old enough to remember when somebody would say, hey, the new version of this software is coming out, and you opened it up and it took you like 3 months to figure out what the developer was thinking. Like, why did he put this over here? Why, right? We had no power. And when the iPhone came out, it kind of changed the power dynamic, right? All of a sudden, I, as a user, now have the ability to, with the swipe of my thumb, delete an experience that I don't like. So all of a sudden, IT and business had to scramble to realize that interfaces couldn't be an afterthought. They actually needed to be a primary objective. And so it's interesting when you see millennials coming up into sales. They're used to this technology. They're used to experiences in digital that are much more thought out and planned, right? They've been considered in the solution. So you see in sales, as millennials get more into the buying spots, they want that same type of experience on the B2B buying side. Mm-hmm. And so those B2C experiences and their experience coming up through technology have impacted the way they want to interact with B2B sales reps. And there's a huge gap, because sales reps historically have struggled with wanting to sell features and functions. It's just where they're comfortable. But they haven't had, a lot of tools to really look at it from their buyer's perspective. Well, now the buyer not only wants you to look at it from their perspective, but they want to be collaborated with. They want the experience to be seamless. So if they want something via text message, or they want email, or maybe you're dealing with somebody who prefers to have some type of hard copy journal that they can work with, they expect those types of experiences to be there. And many of the sales processes out there are just not built that way. And without having the time and the money to invest in that, sales organizations are finding themselves in a bit of a bind, right? We saw with CX, when everybody started talking about customer experience, I remember when it was does it really return any value to the company? I forget the company who did it, but somebody put out a report where they analyzed the stocks of 50 companies that had invested significantly in CX, and the revenue returns were dramatic, right? So now it's no longer a question of, does CX actually provide returns? Everybody knows that it does, and they're investing in it, even if they maybe don't understand it completely. Sales hasn't crossed that chasm yet. They haven't had to deal with that, and it's coming very, very fast, especially as you see AI start to impact the way people are selling, or the way millennials are enabled. And so I think we're kind of at a turning point. We're going to have to see sales organizations, especially in the B2B space, start to embrace some of those CX principles, such as design thinking or value first approach, right? To what is it that their buyer wants. That's a different animal than just making sure your salespeople can actually update their CRM.
Hey, you mentioned the B2B Revenue Executive podcast that sits alongside your blog on the Value Prime website. How did the decision to use a podcast as part of your content marketing come about? And what has the experience of producing and hosting the podcast been like for you?
Well, it's interesting. It started with completely selfish reasons, right? I just love talking to executives and understanding, their perspectives. I like learning. And so for me, it really was hey, I'm seeing a lot of podcasts. I'm listening to a lot. I mean, I probably spend every free moment that I'm not working with a client or in front of my screen, there's audio pumping around me, and it's a podcast of some description. So I decided, it may be just a really nice way to add value to the people I want to talk to. And so it really kind of started there. And yeah, we had plans that maybe it would become part of our business, lead generation stuff, but it really wasn't the genesis idea. And so we worked with, I knew nothing about it. I have no musical talent. So this is the closest I've ever been to a mic in my life. And so we had to get some help. So we started working with an agency called Sweetfish Media, and they helped get us set up. And it turned out that in very short order, because we target revenue executives at higher levels in organizations, and I've got to really kind of do a little sales job to get them on the podcast. But it turned out, because we're asking them, a standard set of questions, we let them pick the main topic, what they're passionate about. We want to give them a platform. But I ask a standard set of questions at the beginning and end, which actually turned out to provide a great deal of value for any sales rep who's actually selling to the companies I'm interviewing. Because part of the process, part of what I'm doing is I am asking them the opening questions in the value selling framework, partially because because I want to know what are their biggest business issues and how are they quantifying that for success, and you know, what do they think the solution is. I'm asking them those questions genuinely because I'm curious, but it also happens to be part of our framework. So anybody that ends up listening to the podcast is like, hey, now I have a way to connect to this person or approach this person in a credible manner. And so we started getting emails about, hey, could you do me a favor and approach this VP of sales or this CMO? And when I would dig in, when I'd reply back, I'm like, I'm happy to have them on the show. What's your thought process behind it? And they're like, well, I'm trying to sell to them and you're asking them the questions I can't get them on the phone to answer. So it's turned out to be very interesting that way. And it's gotten a great deal of response that I don't think we quite honestly were expecting. I mean, you know, doing this podcast at first, it's always like, is anybody out there? Right? Is anybody listening? And it's a little weird. It's the two people talking over the computer and you never know if anybody's going to hear it. Well, it turns out people actually were listening. And so now we do one of those big interviews every week, comes out on a Tuesday. And just this week expanded so that on Thursdays, we're putting out episodes that are a little bit more tactical, a little bit more laid back and accessible. Those interviews are very carefully structured and researched. A lot of time goes into that to make sure the guest's comfortable. Mm-hmm. And then on Thursdays, we do something that's a little bit more laid back, more tactical, that sales reps or marketing people can, you know, hopefully walk away with some implementable, actionable items from.
What are some of the near-term goals or milestones or challenges on the horizon for Value Prime Solutions?
It's all about business growth. So we're trying to grow the business. Now, we're lucky in that we have an established client base because we've partnered with Rick Makinich and George Kavanaugh. So myself and the other people that kind of have come together to form Value Prime, we have an existing client base. But it's about finding those companies that really want to take their sales reps, whether it be their SDRs, and help them understand how to more prospect more effectively, how to accelerate that human connection, or work with companies that are struggling where sales and marketing is not aligned, right? That's critical these days, and there's always a struggle around that. The beauty of the value selling, and another one of its strengths, is it's probably the only methodology I've ever seen where it actually will allow sales and marketing to have a common language and work together. So our goal is really, you know, new logo acquisition, work with new clients, find interesting challenges. I mean, all of us have been around the block probably more times than we'd like to admit. And so we get to, you know, really find those companies that want to invest in making the right choices and enabling their teams. So not saying we're overly picky about clients, but I'll be the first one to tell somebody like, hey, we're not the right answer for what you're trying to do. We really want to work with those companies that want to see the results. So of course there's that. I don't know that I have it defined, but I'm really kind of curious to see where the podcast goes. Like I said, it was started. I would love to say I had some master plan. I didn't. Well, let's be honest. It was I thought it'd be a cool way to talk to people, but it's actually gaining a little bit more traction and momentum than I thought. So finding ways to continually engage with the audience that's listening and provide them value is definitely something that we want to do. And I think the next biggest challenge for us is we're getting ready to offer to some of our clients and more account execs something we call Vortex Labs, which is basically because we use the Vortex prospecting process to train clients, we've actually spun up a little SDR team. And if clients are hesitant, right, to engage in that training, we actually can work with them on kind of a paid pilot. Give us the criteria of people you're looking for. We'll run it through our Vortex prospecting process and show you what the results can mean. Then we can talk about training your organization. That's something we're spinning up right now. And, you know, anytime you expand the business, there's always challenges there, but we're trying to figure out what the right tech stack is and things of that nature.
Well, Chad, where can listeners go to find the podcast and to learn more about Value Prime Solutions?
The best place for the podcast is B2B RevExec, REVEXEC.com. You, of course, can find us on iTunes. And if you want to find out more about Value Prime Solutions, it's just valueprimesolutions.com. You guys are welcome to hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm always open for a conversation there as well.
Chad Sanderson, Managing Partner at Value Prime Solutions. Well, thank you for joining us today, Chad.
Thank you.
Talking with Chad was such a great experience. After the interview, we had an engaging conversation about our respective experiences with podcasting and our shared background in design and UX. It was reassuring to hear that my experience wasn't unique in starting the podcast and not really knowing if anyone would find it worthwhile to listen to. Well, week 1 of football season is behind us, and if your fantasy football season is already in disarray due to injury, as mine is thanks to running back David Johnson's season-ending injury in week 1, head over to FanDuel.com and check out their weekly fantasy football format. Each week is like a new season, and you're never out of the game. Our sponsors at FanDuel have put together a great offer for listeners of the Tech Life podcast. Over 2.5 million players have won a cash prize playing fantasy sports on FanDuel, and this week you could be one of them. It's easy to get started, and once you do, you'll love the faster pace and flexibility of the weekly format. FanDuel has something for everyone this football season. You can get into a contest for as little as $1, and there are lots of contests to choose from. You can also start your own private league and let FanDuel do all the work. Pick a contest, choose your team, and keep track of your score in real time. Sign up today, go to FanDuel.com, click the Join Now button, and use my code TechLife. New users get free entry into the NFL Sunday Million with over $1 million in cash prizes when you make your first deposit on FanDuel. Just visit FanDuel.com and sign up with promo code TechLife. That's FanDuel.com, promo code TechLife, void where prohibited. The next couple of months will be a busy time on the Charleston Tech and Entrepreneur community calendar. The MUSC Innovators Meetup Group that we featured back in July will be holding their next monthly meetup on September 21st. I'll be there and hope to see you. Tom Wilson, the founder of JRS Coding School, will be featured at the next Startup Grind Charleston event on September 26th. Likewise, I'm planning to make this event. The next Harbor Entrepreneur Center Happy Hour is September 26th. And of course, every Wednesday at 9 a.m., they host their weekly 1 Million Cups event. Then, on Saturday, November 4th, they host one of their signature annual events, the Low Country Hoedown, at the Visitor Center bus shed downtown. That event is always a great time. The Revolve Conference is back for 2017 on October 26th and 27th. You'll want to check out the amazing slate of speakers that Carl Hudson Phillips has planned for this year. Finally, Startup Weekend Charleston is on the horizon. This year's event will be held November 10th to 12th, and I'm helping to organize the event. Stay tuned for an episode coming up soon featuring the amazing facilitator we've lined up for this year's event. Our partners at Silicon Harbor Magazine are a great resource for keeping up with all of the events and news in the Charleston technology, creative, and entrepreneur community. Visit them at siliconharbormag.com and follow them on Twitter at SiliconHBRMAG. You can follow us at TechLifePod and also find us on Facebook. The best way to keep up with the show is to subscribe. For iTunes, visit www.siliconharborradio.com or search for Tech Life with Rich Conte or Silicon Harbor Radio. If you enjoyed the show, let us know by leaving us a rating and a review. Subscribing via RSS is as simple as visiting techlife.libsyn.com/RSS. That's all the time we have on this episode of Silicon Harbor Radio, brought to you by the Tech Life Podcast and Silicon Harbor Magazine. I'm your host, Rich Conte, and thanks for listening.